into a source of just pure, frantic loyalty and dread. The adventurers, they've just survived this brutal ambush on the Tribor Trail, right? They hit the Cragmaw goblins hard. But the intel they get from that, well, it completely redefines their entire mission. It's not a delivery job anymore. It's a rescue, a desperate, immediate rescue attempt.
And that urgency, it just changes everything about their posture. The source material confirms they find out their friend, their companion, Don Jon Raskin, the human with the wide-brimmed traveler's hat and this long century-and-a-half history, he was alive. Or, well, he was when they dragged him into the lair.
And the location they give.
Chilling. They're told he's being held in the very heart of the Cragmaw Goblins' domain, a place the captured shaman called the Eating Cave.
The Eating Cave, I mean, the power of language right there is just horrific. You're not just charging into a prison, you're charging into a place explicitly named for consumption. It raises the stakes immediately.
It does. So our mission for this deep dive is to really reconstruct that brutal, visceral experience of assaulting the lair. The infamous Cragmaw Hideout. We need to chart their infiltration, which was actually quite patient and strategic.
And then that terrifying high-stakes fight with the lair's bugbear boss, and of course the immediate tragic cost of their bravery.
And we have to end with that gut-wrenching cliffhanger. The one that proves that the world beneath your feet, it always holds deeper, darker terrors.
We have to start with the environment. Because the setting itself isn't passive here, is it? It feels like an active, hostile entity.
Not at all. Analyzing the documents, the initial approach to the Cragmaw Hideout, it's described as a dark maw, just this gaping hole carved into the hillside. It wasn't just visually unsettling, it was a full sensory assault before a single sword was drawn.
Absolutely. You have to think about the atmosphere you're stepping into. The air wasn't fresh forest air, it was heavy. It was thick with the smell of damp, cold earth, the musky scent of unwashed wolves, and just this underlying sense of decay.
And that stream. The sources make a specific point about the stream flowing out of the cave. It wasn't a rushing, clear brook. It's described as sluggish. It's trickling from the darkness.
Almost like the cave itself was bleeding.
Exactly. Bleeding out into the world. That's a critical psychological detail. It tells the adventurers, and it tells you, the listener, that this isn't just a shelter. It's a wound in the earth, a descent into something actively malignant.
And that environmental dread is so crucial. It raises your anxiety before you even see an enemy. It sets the tone perfectly. This isn't an entry, it's a descent.
And the environment immediately proved it was treacherous. The infiltration starts on this narrow, dusty path leading up to that maw, and it's clear the goblins have they've protected this route.
Yeah, even before they got to the front door, they almost lost one of their own. Turin, the gnome barbarian, relying on his brute durability, his instincts, he narrowly avoided a crude snap trap, a snare hidden in the underbrush.
And that moment, right there, before the real fighting starts, it just underscores the constant vigilance they need. These Cragmaw goblins, they aren't just disorganized thugs, they're masters of low-level harassment. They're not just relying on a big stand-up fight. They're trying to exploit your carelessness, make you burn energy just on the approach.
Yeah.
Psychological warfare, really.
But then you get this strange, almost contradictory detail that kind of breaks the tension. Amidst all the lethal danger near this ancient, gnarled oak tree, they find a collection of painted stones.
It's fascinating, isn't it, the incongruity of it? Who took the time to do that? Was it a ritual, some kind of weird territorial marker, this playful touch? It just contrasts so sharply with the brutality of everything else. It suggests a tiny sliver of something else, something domestic almost.
It really does. It makes you wonder about the centuries. Were they just bored? Are these tokens to ward off spirits? It's a little puzzle piece that complicates just writing them off as pure monsters.
And that complication is key. It forces the party to realize they're fighting a community, however brutal. But that little moment of observation had to be pushed aside pretty quickly. The path led directly into the next threat.
It did. And their cautious movement was absolutely justified. Ohio Jim, the dwarf rogue, whose perception is always razor sharp, he sensed them. He sensed the next wave before they could strike.
And they were positioned perfectly. A dedicated ambush force crouched low among the rocks in the stream. It was a professional-grade ambush. They were clearly expecting pursuit after the fight on the Tribor Trail. The goblins weren't running. They were digging in.
And that fight had to be quick. It was a race against the clock. If they hadn't neutralized those goblins swiftly with spells and steel, the noise would have raised an alarm inside the hideout for sure.
And that would have been it. A strategic infiltration would have turned into a disastrous frontal assault against an enemy that knows you're coming. So, Their ability to dispatch those external threats quietly was what allowed them to keep the element of surprise. But before they went in, they needed knowledge. And this is where Ohio Jim's particular skills became invaluable.
Right, this is where the strategy gets really deep. Ohio Jim uses this subtle, ghostly magic. He basically transforms into a wisp of vapor, a non-corporeal scout, to slip into the cave undetected. An incredibly high-risk, high-reward move.
And it paid off. It
Yeah.
paid off big time. He came back with this fascinating and honestly pretty unsettling observation, something that speaks directly to the internal politics of the Cragmaw tribe. While he was gliding through the entrance unseen, he overheard goblins talking, complaining, actually, about Klarg's useless stuff.
Klarg's useless stuff. I mean, that phrase is more than just gossip, isn't it? It's a strategic goldmine. It tells you right away that the leadership is vulnerable.
It absolutely is. I mean, if you think about it, even in a monstrous bandit lair run by a bugbear, administrative dissent is alive and well. These goblins, who are supposed to be terrified of their leader, are already complaining about his management style, or maybe his taste in loot.
So is this just standard grumbling, the kind of thing you'd hear in any army? Or is it something deeper? Does it hint at a real factional split, a desire to, overthrow Klarg for a more useful leader?
That's the tension, right? If the loot Klarg is hoarding really is useless to the tribe, maybe it's too heavy or just pretty to him but doesn't provide food or weapons, it shows a real disconnect. And that kind of mismanagement is often the first crack in a regime. A clever team hearing that might realize that if they take Klarg out, they might not be fighting a unified, vengeful tribe. They might just be fighting a bunch of confused opportunists.
So the key takeaway from the Spectral Recon isn't just where the threats are, it's how unified those threats are. Jim brought back a political profile of his enemy, not just a map, and that changes everything.
Indeed. But even knowing about these internal tensions, they still had a very immediate physical threat just inside the entrance: the Chained Guardians. They found 3 large, very aggressive wolves guarding a key side passage.
And this whole interaction is just a masterclass in applying different skills to one problem. Plugulep, the Turtle Druid, he doesn't go for confrontation, he goes for subtlety. Casts an invisibility spell and just approaches the beasts unseen.
And what stands out in the sources is the behavioral detail. While Plugulep was invisible, the wolves, they sensed him, but they couldn't see a threat, so they stayed pretty docile. Agitated maybe, but not aggressive.
It says a lot about their conditioning, doesn't it? They were trained to react to a visible threat, not just a scent. The second the visible Ohio Jim got close just to test their temperament, their whole demeanor shifted instantly.
That primal fear just kicked in. The growls, the bared teeth, any hope of just walking past was gone. The contrast is so stark. Stealth gives you this little window of opportunity that direct presence slams shut.
So Plugulep, using that little behavioral quirk, gets to work. He's invisible, working diligently on these thick iron chains with unseen hands. It must have taken incredible focus, surrounded by these tense, powerful animals.
And successfully freeing those 3 wolves was a brilliant tactical move. Think about the cost benefit here. Fighting 3 hostile wolves would have cost spell slots, health, time, all resources they needed for Klarg. Instead, they spent 1 single spell.
And the result, the wolves just bolt, they vanish into the wilderness, no longer an obstacle and maybe even a distraction for any goblins that come looking later. It was mercy and strategy all rolled into one. They removed a major obstacle without bloodshed.
And this commitment to deep infiltration, to avoiding the frontal charge, it's the theme of their whole approach. They successfully bypassed the main guarded corridor, which led them to look for another way in, a less obvious route.
And that search led them to the most physically challenging part of the whole thing, the chimney.
It's fascinating, really. This group, you've got a dwarf rogue and a heavy-set gnome barbarian. They choose a vertical climb. They identify and use this tight, difficult chimney to scale their way into the inner caves. It just confirms that this team prioritizes strategy and tactical position over ease of movement.
But let's think about the logistics of that for a second. Turin, the gnome barbarian, he's built for horizontal, brutal combat. Scaling a tight chimney is exhausting. Was that risk burning all that physical energy worth it? Or did it leave them vulnerable for the fight with Klarg?
That's the gamble, isn't it? The alternative was a main corridor that was almost certainly trapped and heavily guarded. They'd be exposed to archers. The chimney, while physically tough, was probably unexpected. They traded immediate vulnerability, being stuck in a narrow funnel, for the ultimate positional advantage of dropping in on the boss from an unexpected angle. The calculated risk was that the exhaustion from the climb was better than the guaranteed damage from a frontal assault.
A clear choice then. Temporary fatigue in exchange for lasting surprise. And that difficult climb put them exactly where they needed to be.
Exactly. The infiltration culminates as they emerge into what is clearly the main chamber, the seat of power for the whole Cragmaw operation. And the sources describe it vividly.
The atmosphere was just profound squalor. The air was even heavier in here, full of smoke, stale air, and it's all poorly lit by a few sputtering torches. And presiding over this miserable space, the massive, hulking figure of Klarg.
Klarg, the Bugbear leader. This confirms the intelligence. This isn't just a goblin den, it's an operation run by a bugbear. That means greater organization, far greater strength, and a much higher threshold for brutality. And right beside him, his loyal, scarred wolf companion. The sources name him as Ripper.
And Ripper's presence just instantly doubles the threat. It's not a single target boss fight anymore. It's a two-pronged tactical problem.
Precisely. And the fight begins as a psychological contest before it even turns physical. Plepshulep, seeing the danger Ripper represents, he tries this last-ditch, high-risk move. He risks being spotted to attempt a subtle enchantment on the wolf. He's trying to weave this fragile bond of friendship with this fierce, battle-scarred animal.
And the sources confirm the charm held, which is just a massive tactical win. It neutralizes Ripper's hostility, effectively taking Klarg's most dangerous ally out of the opening move. But Klarg himself, he remained the big problem.
He was just this massive, unintelligible threat. Unlike the wolves, he wasn't responding to primal signals. He was pure, brutal authority, and he saw the intruders immediately.
And that fragile piece, that one brief moment where they hoped the magic might hold, it shattered instantly. The sources say Klarg just lashed out with a massive, brutal hand, lunged out and seized the visible Ohio Jim who was trying to get into position.
That's the breaking point. It's so visceral. Ohio Jim's strangled cry for help, it echoes through the cavern, and that's the alarm bell. It signals Klarg's first attack, and it triggers the desperate charge from everyone else. They knew Jim was in life-threatening danger.
So the rest of the party surges forward, Turin, the gnome barbarian, leading the charge. But they face immediate layered counterfire. Klarg isn't the only danger in the room.
No. A hidden archer, a goblin defender, finds their mark instantly. The arrow strikes Turin in the shoulder. It just shows the sophistication of the Lore's defense. It wasn't just a tough bugbear waiting in a room. It was a defended position.
So now the party has this immediate dilemma. Jim is being crushed, their primary damage dealer, Turin, is wounded by a hidden archer, and the boss is fully alerted. What's the tactical priority?
The sources suggest they had to focus on Jim's survival. That was paramount. Despite the archer hitting Turin, the focus had to be on overwhelming Klarg. The archer's a threat, but Klarg's the executioner. They had to pour all their collective damage onto that massive bugbear to break his grip on Jim. And Ripper, thanks to the druid's magic, was just snarling in confusion, still non-hostile.
The cave becomes this chaotic whirlwind, blades against crude axes, spells lighting up the struggle in these flashes of brilliant light and shadow against the gloom. It was a close-quarters, desperate fight to save a friend who was literally seconds from being crushed to death.
And this was the moment where collective effort just overcame individual might. Klarg, for all his size and his brute force, he was finally overwhelmed by their coordinated assault. His defeat was signaled by this heavy, guttural death rattle that echoed through the cavern. The end of his savage reign, the battle for the hideout's leadership was won.
A tactical victory, no question. But the sources confirm that tactical success often comes at a steep emotional cost.
We have to emphasize the immediate, jarring shift in tone here. The echoes of combat fade, the relief of Klarg's death, all that just dissolves. The adrenaline fades, and it gives way to this sickening, profound realization. They had won the battle, sure, but this mission was never about loot or glory. It was about a rescue.
And the cost of that victory was just heartbreakingly high. They risked everything, infiltrated this dangerous, filthy lair, and defeated a bugbear to save their friend. But they found Don Jon Raskin broken and still.
The details of the discovery they're grim and specific. It lends this powerful finality to the tragedy. He was found near a dangerous, precipitous ledge in the deepest part of the cave, and the conclusion was undeniable. His death was the result of a brutal beating, compounded by a fatal fall from that ledge.
All their desperate rushing, all their strategic maneuvering, all the pain and effort, it ended in this profound tragedy. It just highlights the grim reality of adventuring. Even if you're fast, even if you're skilled, sometimes you're just too late. The emotional weight of that failure would be immense, a permanent scar.
This is a moment where the dialogue in the sources slows right down. The aftermath of finding the body is described with this terrible solemnity. Ohio Jim, who was almost killed himself just moments before, his face grim with grief. He performs the duty of retrieving Don Jon's signature wide-brimmed hat.
And that hat, that small, tangible sign of a life of travel and history, it now becomes a symbol of ultimate loss. He retrieves it not just as an object, but as a final tribute. The weight of that must have been overwhelming.
But the personal context deepened even more with the second discovery. They found Don Jon's worn journal. And it wasn't a ledger or a travelogue. It was filled with the man's tales and memories, a profound window into the friend they'd just lost.
That journal just transforms the loss from a tactical failure into this deep, agonizing personal tragedy. It gives you the context for the life that was violently cut short. You see his dreams, his observations, and then you realize the finality of it all. They're holding the remnants of his spirit, his written word, but he's gone forever.
And this detail, it ensures that Raskin isn't just a quest objective. He's a fully realized character whose death has consequences far beyond the immediate grief. The party now carries the weight of his unwritten future, captured in that journal. The tragedy of Cragmaw Hideout is now forever linked to the memory of Don Jon Raskin.
You would expect a moment of mourning here, right? A quiet regrouping. They should have secured the room, healed their wounds, let themselves process that failure.
But the sources confirm that in a subterranean environment, time for grief is a luxury. The dungeon doesn't wait for emotional closure. The deep earth is uncaring.
And that's the critical dynamic shift. Amidst all the shock and grief, Plebgelep's innate curiosity, or maybe it is just the compulsion to make sure the lair was secure, it drew him away. He ventured into a dark, unexplored tunnel right behind Klarg's crude, broken throne.
And that decision, made in a moment of emotional distraction, immediately exposed him to the lair's true horror. It confirmed that the goblins were just the surface layer of danger. The moment Plebgelep entered that tunnel, a new, completely different kind of enemy materialized from the shadows.
A Grick.
A Grick? What exactly is a Grick? We're not talking about something that breathes fire or uses magic. This is an ecologically perfect predator. To really amplify the terror for you, the listener, imagine a creature with rough, oil-slicked hide, not scales. Dark, slimy, almost impossible to grip. Its head is horrifying. 4 strong tentacles surrounding a sharp, powerful, parrot-like beak. It's a monstrosity that belongs to the deep earth. It is not a pet. It's not usually associated with bugbears.
And the attack on Plebgelep was instant, purely predatory. The sharp beak lashed out, and then the real danger. The creature's tendrils wrapped around the druid, constricting him with terrifying speed. It's a horrifying, intimate kind of violence.
Plebgelep, the druid who had just diplomatically freed wolves, lets out this single, desperate cry. A sound laced with sheer, unadulterated terror that just rips through the cavern. And that sound immediately snapped the rest of the party out of their grief over Raskin.
And the outcome was swift and horrific. Plebgelep falls unconscious. He's dragged by this serpentine horror into the oppressive, absolute darkness of the tunnel. The rest of the party is just left staring at the empty space where their friend was standing moments before.
So what does this all mean? The source material ends on this immediate, shocking danger. The Grick isn't a goblin. It's a subterranean predator that confirms this hideout was home to far more than just what Klarg commanded.
The rest of the party, their grief just momentarily forgotten, they turn as one to rush to their fallen friend's aid. They've just defeated the warlord only to be dragged into a fight with an unknown monster that has already claimed one of them and pulled him into the absolute dark. It's a terrifying reversal.
They traded a strategic victory against a known enemy for a frantic defense against an environmental threat that plays by entirely different rules. It confirms a horrifying reality. The Cragmaw Hideout is just the entrance to a much deeper, more dangerous dungeon network.
We have to synthesize the emotional whiplash of this one session. They move from a hard-won victory over Klarg to the profound tragedy of Raskin's death, finding the hat, the journal, and then, without a second of pause, straight into the terrifying threat of the Grick. It was a dizzying, painful exchange.
And it brings us back to that crucial piece of intel from Ohio Jim's recon. Klarg's useless stuff. Was the Grick part of that? An asset Klarg tried to control and failed? Or was it just another terrifying resident of this network that Klarg had no idea was even there?
Given its purely predatory nature, the latter seems more likely, doesn't it? The dungeon's geography, the sudden appearance of a creature adapted for the absolute dark, it suggests the conflict is far from over. It's just shifted direction, from confronting a bandit gang to confronting the deep, uncaring environment itself.
This deep dive leaves us on a truly desperate note. The loss of Don Jon Raskin proves a heavy lesson. Even with courage and overwhelming force, some outcomes can't be changed. Sometimes you're just too late.
But now, with Plupatrelep dragged into the dark, the adventurers face a question that's far more urgent than grief. Do they risk everything they have left, plunging into a deeper, unknown terror for the sake of one companion who is now unconscious and defenseless?
Or do they retreat? Do they accept the crushing reality that the Cragmaw Hideout is a new, expanding graveyard where the darkness itself is the chief predator? That is the ultimate moral and tactical quandary that will define the next chapter. They succeeded in one mission, defeating Klarg, only to realize the real enemy has just begun to fight. You have to wonder what horrors that Grick-infested tunnel holds, and if they have the strength left to face the deep.